Hello and welcome to American Amnesia. I'm your host, Cliff Garner, and I've been kind of putting this off a little bit. There's been a lot of things coming out on this QAnon or Q Anonymous, and I've been rather interested in this whole thing. Supposedly, Q Anonymous is a few people probably who have a Q clearance. There is a rumor that Donald Trump himself is one of them. I suppose it's possible that they're a series of postings on 4chan and then later on 8chan that have been rather cryptic, but they've also been predictive of events that have come. And what they suggest is some of the behind the scenes stuff that we can imagine and we can perceive the activity, but we don't get really the particulars that have been going on with this struggle with what we call the deep state. Now, those of you who have seen some of my earlier work are aware that the deep state is something that I've been talking about for a long time. I was talking about the deep state, although I didn't call it that back when I was doing the original American Amnesia broadcasts on public television here in Springfield. When I was actually going into basically elite theory and explaining how I have always believed that there's this pluralistic elite that's been in the background, and that goes really with my education, with the irony of democracy by Diane Ziegler, and other works too. But that was really one that kind of laid it out well for really generations of people up until fairly recently. I suppose the last, I don't know, 20 years or so. I guess the textbook has fallen out of favor with political science teachers, but it really really discussed the blood and guts of how politics really works, and how it works not only here but in other places. That you have this framework in which not just the government, but the government too, but the financial and economic and social and sociological mechanisms within the society are held together and are made to function. And this it's not a very comfortable feeling, because we like the illusion that we are in control of our destiny. This is one of the reasons why people in California want to overturn the electoral college. They think that people in Kansas and stuff have more say than they do. Well, that's not true. Although the Constitution was written precisely in this way to prevent exactly this situation of New York and California, or any combination of a minority of states, to dominate the politics of the country. And I would say that the only fair way to resolve that is if you take away electoral college, then they lose their representation in the state, in the House. That is fair. Because if they're going to pick and choose who leads the country by a straight vote, then they're going to have to give up a pretty fair amount of what they've accrued by such a large population. And that's only fair. So, any rate, that I think would be a terrible reform. And I think that if they thought it through, they would recognize the logic that's there, that bargaining chip that the other states have of the House of Representatives. They wouldn't like what they got. There would be no other way to do it. And any rate, the notion that we have an elite that's unelected and really not very responsive to the people and somewhat insulated does necessitate periodic reform. And so I am coming to the conclusion that really what we're seeing with Trump is hopefully at some level an American Justinian who reforms the laws. And that seems to be what he is doing, in fact. And really actually doing a pretty decent job of it. Right now, everybody's angry at him over DACA. Well, everybody's angry to everybody. That is a sticky wicket, and it will require some tinkering. But I think basically he has done what he should. He needs to prevent the border from being porous. That's just pure and simple. There needs to be enforcement of and regulation of who is within the borders of the country, at least to where it's much better. I mean, there's going to be people get in and they'll be under the radar and stuff. They'll get away with it as long as they don't mess up too badly. But they shouldn't be voting in our elections and things. That should be prevented. I am against a national registration. I don't like that. I don't want to have a national card, ID card, or anything of the sort. That is not the best idea. I've been really quiet about it because I understand the logic that's going into it. I don't really agree with it, but something has to be done. And that said, there are things that can be done other than that, and I would prefer to see something. Really, just if they enforce the law, there will be no need to put up a wall and regulate who comes in. There really won't be the need for that national registration and licensing or identification or anything of that sort. It would be, I have a passport, and that should be sufficient actually. So that I don't think that there's anything more necessary than to just make sure that the law is met. If the Democrats can't find votes, they should move. They don't need to be bringing everybody and their grandmother in from another country or any other country. It is not necessary. And not only that, if you can't deal with the American people and you want to represent America, then you're going to have to face the fact that you're going to have to talk to us. We're the citizens. Our citizenship matters. There are consequences to elections. There are consequences to people being where they're from. There's also consequences for the attempt, and I do mean the attempt, to replace us with other people. And in something like that is going to cost you, because we won't forget. And I really think the black people should be the angriest of all on that. They have been rendered pretty much extraneous because of the extensive immigration from Latin America that has pretty much replaced them as the second largest ethnicity in the United States. And they've become extraneous, and then the Democrats have treated them that way. They don't care what they have to say. They made the promises, didn't fulfill any of them, and now that they're on the other side of the rainbow, now they're just going to beat up white people. I don't think that that's enough, and I don't think it was right in the first place. And not only that, they were hurt financially more than anybody else because of the economic realities of America. That basically they were the unskilled labor par excellence in the country, and they were being replaced by foreign people who would come over with no particular skills, and they would put them to work over the black people. Terrible consequences. Then we start to get into the abortion issue, and then it becomes even worse. That's the big dirty secret, and they won't talk about that, but they talk about the identity of the mothers, and a very high percentage of them are black. But what about the fathers? I mean, nobody asks that question. The dirty secret is a lot of them are black. That's a dirty secret. It's a terrible thing to think about. And it's time we start looking at those facts. But at any rate, I'm digressing from Q and what I was really trying to get around to. Today I'm going to look at the executive order, and I'll read most of it. I won't read it all. I'll skip over some of the extra stuff, some of the legalese and stuff of that nature. But this executive order was what I, with Q, that really linked with me, and it tallied with what I was seeing with the news and some of the things that are kind of unspoken. This whole Pizzagate thing, when we get everything kind of categorized name for it, then people go after each other, and they claim, the mainstream claims to have refuted Pizzagate. They didn't do anything of the sort. But that's even secondary. The fact is that there has been, ever since Trump has been elected, there has been a move by the Department of Justice, by the FBI, and international police sources as well, that have gone after pedophile groups and human trafficking groups in huge ways. And this is the heart and soul of the Pizzagate thing, is that human trafficking inevitably entails child trafficking. And child trafficking is a particularly nasty underbelly of all of that. It is there. I saw it in Turkey. I saw the human trafficking in a big way, and you almost, it's almost inevitable that you will. In Aksaray in Istanbul, there is a market there. It does exist. And that is in the shadow of the police headquarters. in Istanbul. I've been to Aksaray's police station many times. That's where you have to go if you're a foreign resident to have your residency renewed or even started. I mean, you have to go there. That's where you deal with them. And so it was a periodic visit, about every year, I think, a year or two. But it was just one of those things. You just dealt with it. I don't remember if it was longer or not, but it was like I went there about once a year to get it re-stamped and everything. So you would go there anyway. I mean, just because of that. Aksaray is also a pretty high traffic area. If you go to the main airport in the Ataturk airport, generally from where I lived, you had to go through there to get there. And it provided you with the trains that took you to the station. It was probably easier to go that way than it was some of the others. Now there were times I took a taxi and didn't need to bother. But at any rate, and again I'm digressing. But there was a high amount of prostitution in that area, and you saw them strutting their stuff all over the place. And the last couple of years I was there, the whole market there was glutted with Syrians. That would be men, women, and children. You did see some of that down in Taksim area also. That's the heart of the city, and there's a lot of prostitution there as well. A lot of transsexuals actually there, and they were, of course, many of them were prostitutes. And then if you went down the hill from the Taksim area to what was that called? Oh goodness, the ferry boats, down the ferry boats. Not thinking of it now, but at any rate, there was another area there that was a red light district, and that's what you would see was basically the people that have been traded from other countries. A lot of Russians. The Russians are very popular. Same with Ukrainian women, and then they get them from Romania. Basically, the Black Sea is where the Turks pick up these victims, actually. So the Bulgaria and Romania, Moldova, Ukraine, Russia, they're part of Russia there, Georgia. And of course, you have neighboring Azerbaijan, a lot of Arabs, particularly Syrians at this time, although for a while it was Iraqis. Very good reasons for that, and Afghanis as well. You'd see Somalian women, same with Nigerian. Often they were refugees, so-called. And that whole refugee market that's been dumped onto Europe by Turkey, you see them all. There's Libyans, lots of Libyans. It has been for probably since the Arab Spring, at least. So that was what, 2011, I think, when it started. So since then, there's been just a huge boom of people from countries that were affected by that. Turkey gets people from all over. They get tourists from Iran and from the Arab countries, particularly Saudi Arabia and UAE. And these people, they're the ones that buy a lot of the people in the market. There's Filipinos, quite a few Filipinos that come to Turkey. They're basically looking for work, and they end up in a market sometimes accidentally. But there's also a market from Philippines that sells them to the Arab countries as well, directly and through Turkey. I mean, it works both ways. In China, there's quite a bit of it. I saw quite a bit of it there as well. Again, Russians are pretty high demand, basically because they're blonde, blue-eyed, and they're willing to pay a little extra for that. A little bustier as well. Often tall though, and that for the Chinese it can be kind of intimidating. But there's a pretty fair market over there for Russians. Bigger market for Vietnamese and Filipinos, of course. Again, there's a lot of kidnapping that goes on with the border countries. The government there is. When I was still there, they were kind of winking and nodding at a lot of the prostitution and a lot of the human trade that was over there. But I understand they've cracked down on a lot of the aspects of it. I remember that there was a golf course in Longfong that a lot of VIPs and foreign diplomats and everything else went to. That was run by the government. We used to go through there, and they were running prostitutes out of the clubhouse there, and there were several Russian women, quite a number of different Chinese ethnicities, some women from Myanmar and Thailand, and also from Vietnam, and from Philippines and Indonesia. There was quite a few of them. There was also quite a few Somalians and Nigerians mostly, but there were other African groups that were sending people abroad then. And this fills the market, and they come and go. China was there were people within the government that were making money at smuggling people into America, although that was treated very severely. But there is that element within the government that has been pushing people out of the country and letting them move out. The sales of I don't know if I should say sales, but the amount of money they would take, these coyote types that would smuggle them, was pretty extensive, and quite a few of them were sold as they were being transported. I mean, they would come to their port, and they would actually be, for all practical purposes, a slave. And they'd work in a hot, sweat house and or prostitution house or whatever, maybe both, to work off their debt. And that was pretty much that. With the Syrians in Turkey, it was particularly bad. I would see them on the bus. The coyotes would latch on to them, and they would bring them all the way into the city here, or there, and you would see them kind of pairing them up. They'd put little kids with anybody. The older people had a little harder time begging, and so they often didn't make their quota. So they would pair children with them because children are a little more pliable, a little easier to intimidate as well, but also very sympathetic, and so the children tended to get more money than the older people, so they pair the two together so that they would up the ante, and it would put grandpa out of use or something. It was pretty sick to watch, but you'd see what they were doing. you didn't have to understand the words. You just saw what it was. I mean, they'd have 3-4 families, and they'd mix and match them how they wanted. And then they'd line them up every few feet. You know, they kind of step it off, and that way they could keep an eye on them across the street while they smoked, or you know, sometimes they'd get drunk or chase women or whatever. You know, and they were total slime bags, and they tended to be themselves either Syrians or a lot of times they were Afghanis or Iraqis or, you know, whatever, that had been in, done their little stint with ISIS or al-Nusra or whatever, and then they'd go to the camps and take it easy, and they'd prey on the people in the camps, and they'd smuggle them into the city later on. That's really where it all came from, and those were the jerks that ran the camps. So, at any rate, this whole human trafficking thing, I've seen it up close. It's really in your face when you get out of the U.S. and, well, even out of Western Europe for that matter. You know, it was really in your face. You see it. It's disgusting. And people look the other way. There's a lot of that, a lot of winking and nodding. And the honesty that I've been hearing with people talking about this of late has been encouraging. But I've been talking about it for a long time. And I was talking about it before I went overseas. I saw it, and I'm talking about it still. And there's also some other things that about Q that I'm finding rather interesting. While I was still in Turkey, I had done one of my early programs on YouTube, and you can go back and check it. These are some of the things from Istanbul. But there was a set of shows I did on a couple articles from different veterans groups back here in the U.S. that were letting Obama know that they were watching him. And yes, I do believe that that there is a kind of an informal organization of veterans and old officers and lifetime officers and lifers in the Army and what have you, and with current troops and officers as well. I think that the overlap of the veterans with their still active compatriots is a vital link. And I think that politically they were concerned about what Obama was doing with the surveillance and some of the other unconstitutional things he was doing. I didn't think they were going to overthrow him. I think that there was enough reason to not do that. But they were at the same time concerned, and that they were watching the developments. And I think that what you see with the QAnon correspondences and because it looks like these guys are writing each other and also writing us who are watching and kind of paying attention to this kind of thing, that they're kind of cluing us in on a few things. And that there is also a certain amount of even caused for disinformation that is logical and as well as it's just logical, but also should be part and parcel of this type of correspondence, and I think it legitimizes what they're doing, because they don't want it, certain details, to be exposed too soon or under the wrong circumstances. So I think they put a few things in there that are kind of red herrings to lead away from it. I'm getting a little long without getting into the executive order, but I'm laying the groundwork for what I want to do with this, and I do believe that this is what's going on, and I do refer you to some of the early recordings that I have, and they're like the first few. I don't know. I did probably about maybe 10 or less when I tried to first reestablish, I suppose, the American amnesia, and I opened my page on Facebook, and I started doing a few things with YouTube. This would have been 2012, and I think maybe 13. I might have kicked out a couple, but 2012, I believe, is when the ones that I'm referring to were actually done, and they're fun to. I find them fun to look at. I lived in a very vibrant neighborhood, and I enjoyed living there quite a bit. It was the Jewish district, which is just a couple hills down from Toxum Square area, and so I was pretty close to the heart of the city, but I was in the working class area, and I lived in a Haskell in Okmadan, where a lot of not Yazidis, but there are a lot of Kurds. A lot of Kurds live, and also a lot of Alevis. So there's a lot of protests there, and consequently, the government has killed a number of protesters. They're calling it riots. But one boy was a cause celeb in Istanbul for a couple of years. I forget his name now. He was like 14 years old, got hit in the head with a tear gas canister. Erdogan has given written instructions to his police and riot squads and everything else to fire tear gas, actually pick a person in the crowd and shoot at them with a tear gas canisters. They're supposed to give an arc to it, because the canisters are big and heavy, and so when it hits somebody, it does gives them serious injury. And this particular kid got hit in the head and was put in a coma for over a year. That was my neighborhood. That was close to where I live. And that's when I started seeing riots on a pretty regular basis coming home. That led to me leaving in 2014 during the summer. I miss Istanbul. I miss the people. I miss the food. I miss the HD Iskender, and I miss a lot of things there. Beautiful women. The ancient city, and just walking around Hagia Sophia. The lights at night, and the sea, and the smell of the sea, especially in the summertime when the sun goes down and it cools off a little bit, and you're drinking hot tea and watching the pretty girls walk by. It's a unique place. So, at any rate, I will get to the executive order next time. I'm going to cut this a little bit shorter than usual, but I am going to be discussing Q Anonymous a little bit here, and probably put a couple things out here in the next few days. So until next time, take care.